Welcome to today's webcast, brought to you by Sword Caboodle and CRM Magazine. I'm David Myron, Editorial Director of CRM Magazine, and I'll be the moderator for today's broadcast. Our presentation today is titled, Customer Communication is Changing. Are you ready? Before we start, allow me to explain how you can participate in this broadcast. There will be a question and answer session at the end of the broadcast. If you have a question during the presentation, just type it into the question box provided and click on the Submit button. We'll try to answer as many questions as possible, but if your question has not been selected during the event, you will receive an email response to it within a few days. Plus, we'll have a short poll question during the event, so when the poll question pops up on your screen, please select your answer and we'll show the results during the live presentation. Also, if you'd like a copy of this presentation, you can download it once the event is archived. Now, I'll introduce our speakers for today's event. We're very fortunate to have two highly respected social CRM experts on this webinar, starting with Paul Greenberg, author of the best-selling book, CRM at the Speed of Light, and president of the 56 Group, and chair of the CRM Evolution Conference. Mitch Lieberman is the vice president of marketing at Sword Caboodle. For more information on our speakers today, you can click on the Bio tab on your console. So without further ado, let's get right into it, and I will now hand it off to Mitch Lieberman, who is the Vice President of Marketing at Sword Caboodle. Welcome to the broadcast, Mitch.
Thank you very much, David. I really appreciate you moderating today's session, and really excited to have a chat with Paul. It's great to have conversations with people about social CRM. It's also great to have conversations with people about CRM and customer experience. And one of the focus areas today is to think through the customer perspective. What's important to the customer. But I wanted to start off in a little bit of a review, and kind of see if I can jar Paul's memory. It was about a year ago, in early February, that Paul hosted the first Social CRM Summit down in Washington, and the picture portrays that one of those rare snowy events down in Washington, which people seem to be very familiar with this year. So, Paul, one of the things I wanted to first ask you, if you could give just a couple minutes on what the summit was, and then we can get on to some of these questions which I have here, and I've polled some friends as well to see what has changed. So maybe just a couple words about the summit itself.
I was actually tempted to say summit. You'll have to work a little harder on that one. I can't remember. Well, actually, this is actually sort of an amazing event, partly because of the snow itself. But the actual idea was that for the first time, actually anywhere, we were launching social CRM training, which is sort of the original idea, although it, weirdly enough, evolved into something a little more than that. The attendees at this thing were fairly phenomenal, too. We had a large cross-section of industry influencers. We had a substantial number of vice president level and up vendor representatives, and, of course, the attendees on the practitioner side. The thing was done right in the middle of Snowmageddon, too, which was pretty astonishing. It was like 2 feet of snow. I mean, I didn't even go home for 4 days. I only lived 20 minutes from the site. So what we did at the event was to begin to actually put forward for probably the first time anywhere actual strategies, definitions, strategies, frameworks, and practical approaches to social CRM. And again, to social CRM as an evolutionary part of CRM. And the effect was phenomenal. And in fact, we've done it several times since, and it's been sellout everywhere around the world. What it did, though, was that it actually generated more, I guess partly because we were all kind of stuck at the same hotel and couldn't move for 4 days. It generated sort of a shockwave, too. I mean, there were close to 3,000 tweets that came out of it, which, as one of the teachers made me wonder how much people were actually listening. Right. And
I think I was high on the list there, Paul. So I'm sorry.
I think you were number one, in fact, if I remember. But what it did was there was sort of a shockwave that came out of it as a result of that, which is people became, interestingly, even more aware of social CRM as a practical capability as opposed to just sort of a general idea. And that was, I think, the biggest benefit of it.
Right. So my question there is, and you kind of touched on it, and maybe I can take responsibility for small parts of it. Did we overhype it? Did we push it too fast? It being the social part of CRM and not giving the practitioners and the people that actually have to use it enough time to catch up.
Well, the answer is sort of yes and no. I mean, it wasn't a matter of overhyping anything, really. We were just, in effect, identifying something that had already happened, and it had happened actually, if you really want to pinpoint a rough date, 2004, which was the emergence of a social customer who was demanding different things on the business side, business institutions, even though that social customer really was a more communicative person, right, and the way they communicate. So consequently, business response to this social customer who was communicating with peers, who was demanding different things of businesses, who wanted more involvement in the companies that mattered to them. That social customer pretty much said, look, here's my terms. You meet them or not, but here's my terms. And what social CRM was a response to that. It basically said, all right, well, we'll try to develop some sort of programmatic approach to actually doing that. Now, did we give people time? It's not really, wasn't up to us to give people or not give people time, really. Right? All we could do, and, people like you and I and others were spending a lot of time doing, was trying to figure out how to actually give people the tools and capabilities and the thinking that they needed to at least begin to approach it.
Right.
And in that regard, I don't think we overdid it.
So with that in mind, you brought us back to 2004, but then my question is, within the past year, or maybe 18 months, did we catch up? Did we, are there things but just within the last year that surprised you? Are we where you think we would expected us to be?
Well, I'll put it this way. I'm surprised a little bit surprised in a positive way, a little bit surprised in a negative way. On the positive side, look, social CRM is part of mainstream discussion now. Mm-hmm. Okay, and it's despite all the battles that went on over the definition, people pretty well have an idea of what it is. Okay, and in conversation, when it comes to practitioners and others, it's part of their business conversation. But note, I didn't say anything about execution, right? Right? Social CRM as a strategy is way behind where it probably should be. As a tactical piece, it's pretty much where it should be. So what's happened is social CRM is a holistic strategy at companies you rarely see. Okay, I'd say right now the only company I could really truly say has it, and even this is a little bit of a stretch, is Procter & Gamble, and they don't call it social CRM. They don't call it anything, really. They just do it. On the other hand, what we are seeing, and this is where I'm kind of very happy, really, is we're seeing lots of pieces of it being implemented. So, for example, you're seeing customer service communities or Twitter-based or Twitter being used as a customer service channel. You're seeing increases in, say, social marketing where sharing and user-generated content are important pieces of it. You're seeing a lot more in collaborative sales, where people are using internal collaboration to identify better ways of approaching opportunities, gaining competitive knowledge. You're seeing much greater use of sales intelligence. You're seeing a number of things that are from a specific and tactical level, strengthening social CRM, but social CRM is more of an umbrella term than it is an actual holistic strategy.
So I polled. So in preparing for this, I talked to some of the folks that were there, and Prem Kumar suggested that it's an interesting point. We're breaking silos for another. So are we introducing? I'll kind of translate a little bit, or maybe refocus. Are we creating yet another silo of information, which is, the collaborative enterprise seeks to break the silos, and social CRM is supposed to extend communications. But at this point, have we done that, or have we created another silo?
I don't think we've created another silo, no. I think what we could create one. Look, human beings, as a general rule, naturally break things down into things that they're comfortable with. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's just what we do, so we understand them better, right? And silos tend to become the organizational versions of things that we can, put our fingers on, so to speak. And so our tendency is toward creating silos, but I don't think, first of all, if you define, let's say, traditional CRMs, marketing, sales, and customer service as silos rather than departments, then the answer is, well, yeah, we could be extending silos. Right. Now, on the other hand, for example, you have, let's take the internal collaboration for a second that CRM and social CRM are now getting integrated with. In the beginning, if you look at Enterprise 2.0, which is what it was called, it was a silo. There was this whole other area that was like wikis and internal communities and activity streams and so on that was isolated from everything else. But now what's happening is that's just becoming an integrated part of corporate life, right, in the companies that are doing it. So even though it was identified sort of on its own, it's now being fully integrated into an overall capability or an overall life of business, so that people are able to collaborate better. So what began as sort of a new area that was isolated from other things, aka a silo, is now actually being fully integrated and is losing its silo status. And I think the Silo Association of America is about to disbar it, in fact. So, what you're seeing now is that same thing with social CRM. I mean, initially, part of it was just definitional, but right now it's seen as an extension of CRM, right, and it's seen as a strategic effort, to engage social customers. So that's not really a silo.
Right. Okay. One other comment came from Mark Thomas, who suggested that European companies are thinking how to use it for business applications and seem to be a little bit more practically minded, if you will. Do you see, have you talked to, you've talked to people, in different continents. Do you see differences in adoption between different cultures or continents, or is it not sliced and diced that way?
No, it absolutely is. I mean, in the same sense that you could say there's difference in, let's say, a UK business culture that's different than a US business culture, you can also say the same thing about adoption, right? In other words, depending on how the culture works, is also creates the mindset that says, this is easy to understand, this isn't easy to understand, this is useful to me, this isn't useful to me. A lot of that really has always been adoption, or been culture. So now the other side is just how the businesses have historically worked. So, like, for example, we see an enormous amount of interest in social CRM in the UK, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, and in Europe in general. In fact, the training itself just was done in London at the end of last year, and is going to be in Madrid coming up in March. So, and then probably some other interest. We're getting some other interest from the EMEA too. So the interest is high. I think in the U.S. the adoption rate is a little faster for the technologies, and that's part just simply of the American culture, really. But so there are some cultural differences, and it does generate the rate. But some of it, look, you know what? All in all, if people see the value of it, they'll do it. If they don't, they won't, and that's just a human trait.
Great. Well, great. I'm going to move us forward here towards some of our core topics, if you're okay with that, which is the customer view is what matters. So the customer view of value. So it's extending social. One of the guiding principles of social CRM was to engage and bring the customer into the conversation. Part of having a conversation with somebody is to understand and realize their viewpoint, and actually make sure that you take it into consideration, and that you think about everything you do in how customers are going to perceive it. So with that, David, do you want to talk a little bit about our approach in some of these questions?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that, Mitch. And Paul, thank you for your input. So our first question that, Mitch, we had worked on before this event, that I have for you is, are metrics getting in the way of what customers on the other end of the phone really need?
Yeah, I think they are, but I think that metrics are important, and metrics are a way of companies measuring themselves and seeing how they're performing. That said, I think that sometimes they get in the way because they're inside out. They're thinking about the company first and not taking into consideration what the customers are most focused on. And Paul, any thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. A few things. I mean, one of the things that's so funny to me about metrics is that people try to fit, look, the reason that metrics exist is so someone's going to measure success or failure against something, right? And somebody's job is often on the line based on metrics, right? So, for example, if you look at a historic customer care or contact center metric, it's been what? First call resolution, right? And the interesting thing about first call resolution, which sounds great, is that, it's very expensive to go to second and third calls when it comes to, agent answers. So, so first call, is like, I forget the number, but second call is like $55, and third call would be about $155 for the cost of the call. Well, the interesting thing is now that's become actually an ancient metric, right? And because you have multi-channel communications going on between customers and companies now, and they could correspond with you or communicate with you via Twitter or email or chat or something, some other way of talking to you, Facebook perhaps, and the idea is actually to make sure it never even gets to a first call. So you can that's one area where first contact resolution becomes a metric that's actually a little more appropriate to the time, and first call resolution can actually become detrimental depending on what the value proposition or what the requirement is. So the other side of it is the flexibility, which you raised, Mitch, which you're so on the money about. Just to give you an example, I've noticed with a lot of banks recently, a lot of major banks, that I shouldn't say a lot, several major banks that they've gone very strongly on the idea of metrics associated with specific processes. So they'll have a procedure, and at the end of that procedure is some sort of metric, meaning, you've responded in such and such a time. But the bank's processes are inflexible. So consequently, when a customer does something or requires something that forces the process to be flexible, which of course changes the application of the metric, they won't do it. And in the meantime, they damage customers. I mean, I'm actually leaving out the name of a very specific bank that just did that to me. But that's not something that I'll put it this way. I've seen it in 4. If I named all 4, you'd know all 4 banks that have done exactly that. So
I want to interject one thing in there, Paul, which is, and I forgive me for not remembering the source, but there was a recent report that suggested financial institutions and banks are significantly behind in the social channel.
Which makes sense, of course, and partly because of the way they're driven around this, inflexibility, and the metrics actually drive the inflexibility because someone has to answer to it. So they do get in the way in that regard. On the other hand, as you rightfully pointed out, you have to have them. You do have to measure. There's no question about that. But the idea is to create flexible capabilities to measure, too, and also measurements that are actually appropriate to the 21st century, not the 19th.
Well, with that said, you mentioned, Paul and Mitch, we talked about first call resolution. Paul, you mentioned average handle time or handle time, and there's also another metric that's sort of an old sort of antiquated metric in the contact center is the average handle time. But are companies focusing on what they find valuable or what the customers find valuable? Mitch, if you want to start us off on that discussion. Paul, you can jump in if you like.
I'm never going to hold Paul back. I think he's going to jump in.
Yeah, don't worry. You don't have to worry about that.
I think that the companies are struggling with this particular one because they're under pressure, operational pressure to save money, and you save money by reducing there are companies that have very specific, calculations about how many minutes on a call costs exactly how much. But I think there is a focus on reducing costs, but other parts of the organization are wanting to actually take the opportunity to listen and engage with their customers. But the problem is the call duration doesn't change. And so the cost center, which is what contact centers typically fall under as a cost center, I think that's coming under scrutiny, if you will. I'd like to see it, and I think many would like to see it. More people consider, do you have your customer on the phone? Why don't you take the opportunity to talk to them and hear what they have to say? But that's I don't think there's enough emphasis put on that particular point.
Well, within that context, too, I mean, there's an irony to this, too, because ultimately what's valuable to the company is not the same as what's valuable to the customer, but if they provide the customer with what's valuable, it will become of value to them, right? So, the customer has ideas on what's valuable to them, and the reason they're even interacting with you is because they think that you may be the company that can provide that value to them, right? They don't know that necessarily, but they think it. All right. On the other hand, you're a business, and you've got operational requirements, and you've got metrics that you are answerable to, and you've got things that are based on what you have a return you're looking for, and so on. That's somewhat different than what the customer sees as valuable. So, the way you have to be, are companies that are truly customer centric focus on what is it that we provide to the customer that ultimately brings value back to us. That's when they understand it best. Most companies are not that way, typically. They're more like we need to meet our operational requirements, and if the customer is somewhat damaged in the process, well, we'll accept a certain level of damage because, the metrics we are being held to are cost efficiencies, not effective results. So what you find here, and which always fascinates me, is that companies tend to make dumber decisions before they get smart, because then they see the consequences of the dumb decision, and there are so many examples to point out that I imagine if we ask every single person listening in right now for 5 examples in the next 10 minutes, they could give us, all of them, 5 examples in the next 10 minutes, and not one of them would miss. So, you have this irony, because it's really not an either or, and yet, and even though mine sounds, my response sounds glib, meaning, hey, if the company provides value to the customer, they'll get value in return. The reality is that's always the way it actually works. And if you look at it, and anyone wants to look at examples, there's plenty of them. Just take a look online at presentations on the SlideShare that we've all put up.
and we won't name any names there either.
Right.
Well, Paul, that sounds good, and certainly benefiting the customer certainly sounds like the way to go, and that company should focus on adding value to the customer. But proving that to the company can be a challenge. Any thoughts on how do you, with what we talked about earlier with metrics, companies still, the value of metrics are important, but measuring the right things are also important. How do we prove, perhaps with metrics, that by adding value to the customer, it will then return value to the company?
Well, honestly, and call me stupid if you want, I actually wouldn't do it that way. What I would do is this. I start from one thing, and when I go to companies, I literally do exactly this. I recognize one thing about all human beings is that we're all, every last one of us is self-interested. And that's not selfish, just self-interested, meaning, we have lives that we want to be happy in, and consequently we want to do things that make us generally happy throughout our lives, and relative to that, we want to make sure that, if we have a career, we want it to be a good one. So if I'm in a business and I'm a decision maker, okay, I'm a C-level decision maker, let's say, I'm not sitting there determining just simply what's good for the business when I'm making a buying decision on CRM or social CRM. You know what I'm doing? I'm saying, okay, is it good for me too, right? Because that's part of this, right? In other words, if I think it's good for the business, but I see no benefit to me at all, why would I buy it? Why would I? I mean, why would anybody do that? I mean, most people are going to be self-interested enough to make sure there's something in it for them. And maybe, if it's good for the business, it means that consequently they get a promotion because it was good for the business, and that's what's good for them in their eyes, so they make the decision. But you get the idea. So any buying decision that a company is making always has to consider that. It's why you have this line of kind of approach that people do now. It's called service dominant logic, right? When they're actually doing materials, when they're going out and doing design, or when they're doing marketing and other things, which says, look, as a vendor, it's not the features and functions we provide you, it's the jobs we help you do.
Right.
That's a huge difference in thinking, but subtle difference in writing. And yet at the same time, it says that appeals to the self-interest of the individuals. And that's the approach.
It's sort of like saying, a company, so many people when I talk to them about their approach to market, they say, their businesses are in business to make money. But that is not in line with what the customer wants in a relationship with that business. If a business is in business to create value for the customer, that's more in line with what the customer wants.
Exactly right.
And it's also the business's responsibility to understand how that value is perceived.
Yep.
Okay. Talking about value and benefiting the business, let's switch it a bit and talk about the benefits to the customer. So what benefits do customers get by taking conversations to the social channels? Mitch, why don't you start us off?
Who's starting? Sorry. So, I mean, I think the immediate, I said a while ago that the Twitter is a good example of this, that Twitter is immediate gratification meets CRM. And I think people go on to social channels. Somebody put out a stat, again, I apologize for not being able to give the direct reference, that when somebody puts out something on a social channel, that they have 80% of people expect a response from a customer, from a company within an hour or less, 45 minutes maybe. So I think that the benefit to customers and our response, the company's response to those kinds of queries that come up on social channel, in some ways, I think we created a bit of a monster because we did start to respond. But that didn't fit into the normal flow and the normal process of the contact center. So the benefit to customers that are taking it to the social channel is, to a slightly physical analogy, they've been able to cut the queue. They've been able to cut in line and get help a little bit more quickly. And I think that many people that are in this particular call or listening to this webinar, especially some that I've talked to, have definitely been able to take advantage of that.
And and the other side of it is just very simple. Well, I mean, it's two things to consider. One thing is just because the customer takes it, that doesn't mean the customer is doing the right thing either. And I think if a lot of people take a look at Kevin Smith, the director's fiasco with Southwest, Southwest ultimately did all the right things, and Kevin Smith just kept exploiting the social channel because he had a movie coming out. Sometimes the business does the right thing, and it still doesn't help very much when it comes to that. So the customers understand one thing when they go to the social channels is they have a willing and ready audience of like-minded people out there, and even if they don't necessarily know them, but they know that they're like them, and that's a real key difference. I mean, the thing we've often referred to is this Edelman Trust Barometer, which says that it's the trusted source for who is your most trusted source, and it's been coming out for over a decade. And back in 2003, the most trusted sources were financial advisors and industry analysts, which, of course, certainly was a wrong source of most trusted. And someone like me, a person like me, which is, again, a peer who you don't necessarily know, but you feel is something like you, was only 23% the most trusted source. 2004, that went up to 51%, and it's never really ever gone down below 58% since then, or 57%. And so you go out to Twitter or you go out to Facebook, you're talking to that person who thinks that I can trust someone like me, and they can trust me. And consequently, they tend to broadcast what you broadcast because they trust what you broadcast. And it doesn't mean you're an influential person. It simply means that you're someone like them and that they actually want to make sure that the word goes out because they feel that what's going wrong with you, if it's a complaint, is wrong. Could go wrong with them too. so you see this a lot, actually, and the consequence that the customers understand that, and the more sophisticated they get, honestly, the most sophisticated ones tend to be able to game it too. They know how to game it. They get things out of it. Like, just a simple example, I was on Virgin America not too long ago, and I had a really it was a crappy seat basically, but I decided to put out something just to see how fast Virgin America would respond on Twitter, and because they have in online you can go on the web and on the internet on the plane, and I put out a tweet, and within about 10 minutes I got a response from someone from Virgin America who was monitoring the Twitter channel, and we actually spent 20 minutes of the flight talking back and forth, and she was absolutely astonishing at how good she was at it. And mine wasn't really a complaint either. It was just sort of a thing. But the quickness of the response, even though I didn't like the seat I was in or the situation I was in particularly, totally overcame anything that I might feel about the seat itself. So and people who know I now know, though, because I've had the experience with them, that if I need something from Virgin America, the place to go is social, not direct.
Ooh. So I mean, we might need to move on, but I'll kind of end with, is that right?
No. No, it's not.
Okay.
That's why I said people game the system.
Right.
They game the system. It's not right.
Right.
Unfortunately, we're talking about metrics. Time is one of them that we have to follow. So moving on, I'm going to, and for the sake of time, I'm going to combine the next two questions into one. The question is, how comfortable do you think most companies are with the concept of customer experience? And if you can, explain a little bit about experiences versus relationships. What's the relationship between the two? Mitch, if you want to kick that off, and Paul, feel free to jump in.
Sure.
I think that companies are not completely comfortable. They'll say they are. I think that some people are missing the overall concept of customer experience, because customer experience has a number of touch points. And so I think companies would say that they're comfortable with the customer experience, but they'll focus on either the product experience, the product and use experience, the service of a product. If it's a product that has a type of service, like say a cell phone or a cable company or something like that, but don't combine it holistically with the experience of then communicating back to the company on just even standard channels. I'm not even going to talk about the social channels we just talked about over the past 10 minutes. I'm just going to talk about the overall experience of picking up the phone and calling when they have a problem. So I would think more companies need to create combined teams internally, so that the customer service team, the support team, the product team all sit in the room together and hash this out a bit, and then you can get to experiences versus expectations, because each one of those individual departments will have a sense of what customers expect of them, but a company in general needs to have a more holistic view of experiences and expectations.
Okay. I mean, most companies, when it boils down to it, they know that the customer's experience with them is important. That doesn't mean they necessarily have some sort of scientific or let's say at least focused framework to deal with that. That's not necessarily what they do. I'll give you an example of a company that does it right. There's a company out of Sri Lanka. It's actually the largest telco in Sri Lanka, called Dialog Telecom. And they understand several things about the customer. Number one is that they're competing with 5 other telcos in Sri Lanka, and although they have 6 million customers. Number two is that each of their customers, not demographic segments, but each individual customer has a somewhat different expectation of what they are going to get from Dialog Telecom. And number three is that to differentiate themselves most effectively, they have to actually understand the difference between what the customer expects and what they provide to enhance that, to support that expectation, to exceed that expectation. All right. Consequently, so what they do is typically when you deal with, there's a process called customer experience mapping. And most companies do it, if they're doing it at all, where you map all the touch points in all the channels with individual customers. Most companies, if they do it at all, do it maybe once a quarter if they're doing it a lot. Dialog Telecom does it every day. Now, it's not every customer every day, obviously, but they're constantly refining, mapping, and upgrading what the customer's experience is at each of those touch points. So, like, they walk in the door of a store that's selling phones, or they go online and do something in particular. B, what the customer expected of that interaction. C, did it meet, not meet, or exceed that expectation? And D, and this is actually almost more important than any of them, how much weight the customer placed on the result, whether it met, exceeded, didn't meet that expectation. Consequently, they have an incredibly refined view of their customer, and their chief customer officer, whose name is Sandra Zoyza, actually sits there and has all the numbers, all the metrics, has all the verbatims that they need to actually understand their customers down to the individual level in multiple places, and have developed a whole array of services that they provide to the customer based on that, number one. So, for example, turns out they have an incredible number of pregnant moms who are busy interacting with them at a lot of times. So they actually have a medical service that's based on, you pay a small amount for getting advice from a doctor but not major advice that doesn't need actual care, just informational stuff. So they've developed services. As a result of this, they're a AAA company, and they're considered the number one company of all companies in the entire country. So because they understand customer experience, they understand what expectations mean, and they understand the weight of expectations besides. So, it's a very doable thing, and it's extremely exciting when you do it right.
So just again, focusing on customer experiences, there seems to be a lot of attention around customer experiences in the contact center and among customer service professionals. What about sales and marketing people? Do they think about it enough?
I'll let Paul go first on that.
Yeah, well, the answer is they think about it, but they've tended to think about it in sort of a traditional historic sense, meaning the customer tends to be more of an object of a sale or of a message than they are a subject of an experience. However, both marketing and sales are undergoing, let's say evolutions right now where they're realizing that, in fact, the customer's experience is paramount. So are they thinking about it? The answer is yes. Are they thinking about it in the right way? For the most part, no, because of the way that they have historically been defined. But for example, marketers have historically been the protectors of the company's, the protectors of the company's virtue via message. So now they're being asked to be authentic, which involves interactions with customers, which involves a knowledge that the customer might actually come to you and say, hey, marketer, or hey, sales guy, you're the one I've been talking to. I need you to fix this, or I need you to answer this, or I need you to do this, meaning take a customer service role.
Right. So I'm going to interject, but it also comes back to traditional metrics. So, David, you mentioned traditional call center metrics, but now let's switch over to traditional sales and marketing metrics. So salespeople have been charged by their business to sell. And marketing people have been charged by their businesses to build awareness and to create a pipeline for those salespeople to sell. The longer that people operate based on how there is an incentive, a monetary incentive for them to perform in a certain way, and unfortunately, they're not incented. Sales and marketing folks are not always incented to spend enough time actually doing that listening that Paul was just mentioning. Especially we want to listen. So that would be kind of my interjection, is that if we let them listen more, then maybe they would change.
Shifting gears a little bit and focusing on relationships now, as experiences, when you sort of group them together, suddenly, voila, you have a relationship after a certain amount of experiences. But the question is, do customers really want a relationship with companies?
The answer is yes, but it's not always a relationship in the sense of, I'm in love with you, marry me. It's more like I need a relationship with a company because I have a particular thing I need to get done. Okay, so it could be a purely utilitarian relationship, meaning, you know what my relationship is? I want to buy stuff from you, and I don't want any trouble, and that's it. I mean, they're not looking for you to exceed expectations. They're looking for you to, as the folks from Sword Caboodle have often heard me say, they're looking to keep the ordinary ordinary. Some of it's just pure utilitarianism. So, for example, it could be a customer who calls up a company and says, you know what, I need your address. And they just need your address. They don't want you to sit there and send them balloons and give them a gift, and they just simply want your address, and they want to be done with it in a minute. That's one kind of, it's a relationship, but it's utilitarian, and it's something that the vast majority of relationships you have with companies tends to be that. But there are companies that are different and better, and you know, I wouldn't put Starbucks in that category anymore since I think their coffee's burnt half the time. But they used to be that for a lot of people, right? And still are, really. I mean, for people who just love the Starbucks experience, and they will talk about it all day, and they'll participate in my Starbucks ideas and come up with ideas for new drinks, because they want to co-produce with a company. Another thing, just to follow that, nobody wants to co-produce or co-create with a company or come up with product innovation unless they have a relationship or want one. So, for example, IBM did a huge survey of CEOs back in November of last year that they, through their Institute for Business Value, which is, by the way, it's a free survey. You can download it. Just look up IBM CEO Survey 2010. And in there, they had interviewed 1,500 CEOs. I mean, this is a seriously heavyweight survey. And they found that the CEOs had all been talking to their customers, and of the ones that talked to their customers, which is pretty much all of them, they found that 78% of the CEOs said that their customers told them they wanted to co-produce with them. They want to actually co-produce products, which is an indicator of a relationship. I mean, why would they bother if they didn't want to have one? Right, so so the answer is always yes. It's just that it varies from purely utilitarian to deep involvement in product innovation.
Right. The customers want the value that a relationship produces. They want to go back to your Virgin Airlines kind of thing. You now know somebody there, and I mean you don't know this person directly, but if you have an interest, you'll chime in and talk with her again or him. I don't know which one. But I think that's where the customers that's what relationship means to customers.
Yep. All right, thank you both. At this time, why don't we go ahead? We have a poll that we'd like to present. So why don't we go ahead and post that? And our poll question reads: should individual customer segments, platinum, gold, silver, etc., receive the same service experience? Please select one of the following: yes, no, or it depends. And while we're waiting for the poll results, allow me to take this opportunity to inform you of CRM Magazine's upcoming CRM Evolution Conference from August 8th to the 10th at the New York Hilton. You can join CRM Magazine editors and our conference chair and co-presenter here on this webinar, Paul Greenberg, and to learn how to take your CRM efforts to the next level. Attendees will get a chance to meet with leading industry analysts and consultants and hear about the successful deployments from CRM project leaders. For more information, you can visit www.destinationcrm.com/conference. Okay, so it looks like the results are in, so why don't we go ahead and post those. And in response to the question, should individual customer segments receive the same experience? Wow, look at that. We have
consensus.
Yeah, right. If only. So 42% said no, and 34% said yes, and 23% said it depends. Look at those results. That's really interesting. Let's talk about that for a little bit. Why is there so much disparity here? Why don't we all seem to agree?
Well, I'm actually kind of puzzled. That's a really interesting. I mean, when we were discussing the question, I put that out there. I'm not quite sure what I expected, but I did expect a fair number of it depends. But the number of no's is interesting, and I think some of us do feel this, especially people that travel a lot. I think it seems to be in my face a lot when you travel, and for those of us that travel a lot on one airline and then maybe not so much on the other, you suddenly feel like you're a different class of citizen when you switch from the one you travel a lot on to the one you don't. And it kind of, as it, I'm bringing it up in this call or webinar, it sticks with you for a long time. So it's very much in your face. And I don't think people constantly being reminded they're not as valuable as somebody else in the room or somebody next to them.
it's funny because I'm looking at this question. I'm thinking, well, I wonder if this question read, should individual customer segments, blah blah blah, receive the similar service experiences? I would say yes, easily. The same. I'm not sure why you would have the different customer segments of that. Why you would have a loyalty program that differentiates things. I mean, so then the question becomes: are we talking about a service experience that differs from, like, the privileges that one gets within their category? I mean, is that different? Ultimately, I would say this, and this is a really interesting result. I would say that all customers should be treated well. There should be different benefits to customers who have been stickier with the company than others. But there needs to be a baseline experience that every single customer deserves that is absolutely, minimally meets all expectations. Doesn't have to exceed it, but it at least has to meet it. That meets all expectations. There has to be a baseline. But above and beyond that, you wonder, loyalty programs become meaningless if everything is identical. So if you believe in loyalty programs, which, for self-interest, of course I do because I fly so much, right, then you would say, well, no, not if it eliminates benefits.
Right.
So just another thought. I guess each company would have to determine what their own definition of silver, gold, and platinum is, and if it could be, I suppose, that one company, platinum, might be such a high-value customer that you really don't want to define what the rewards are, and it could be determined on a case-by-case basis because they're so valuable, and you don't want to sort of fit them into a mold.
Right.
I suppose that could happen too. So perhaps.
And so, by the way, when I was building this particular question, David, and thinking through it, I thought about my judgment and decided to stay away from the obvious next part, which is the clout score. So, but we're not even going to go into that at this point.
We can.
No. We'll leave it. Maybe if Q&A people have an interest in that, we can go into it.
All right. Well, why don't we just move on with the rest of the presentation, and I'll hand it back over to you, Mitch. So why don't you take it from here?
Sure. I just appreciate everybody participating today. It means a lot to me, and it's important. And I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes, and I call it a very brief commercial interruption, and I hope the image brings up, people can remember this, anybody that watches Super Bowl or has any interest in advertising. This was a particular favorite of mine. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about Sword Caboodle, and think about some of the questions we talked about today. So what if average handle time did not really matter to your customers, which it probably doesn't matter to them. They're busy people, but they just want their problem solved. Or if your customers didn't care if it was solved on the first call, just as long as it was solved. And thinking about your agents as well, what if your agents felt empowered to be customer advocates, spending time fighting the good fight or fighting for what is right for your customers? What if you looked at your contact centers through the eyes of your customers, as Paul and I have been chatting about, which was the focus of this webinar, instead of the CFO? Or customers who emailed or tweeted had the exact same experience as those who called, or now reverse that, customers who called had the same experience as those that decided to email or tweet or choose different channels. And finally, if you were able to interact with your customers based on their needs, not your rules. Companies have lots of rules, but those rules need to be dynamic, and we need to be able to adapt to what the needs of the customer are. So this is just a long-winded way of saying is that I do believe in metrics, and metrics are important, but let's make sure we're focusing on the right things. Operational efficiency issues should not take precedent over customer experience. Sword Caboodle, we think about it, the way our approach is what we call the customer engagement continuum. It's a way to accelerate your ability as a company to deliver consistent customer service across the channels and preferences, leading to an exceptional customer experience. because, frankly, it's what your customers deserve, and it's the right thing to do. Multi-channel, people will be talking to you on many different channels, and so you need something behind the scenes that helps that experience be as positive and as good for people when they're having issues. Some customers prefer to be served. So you need to empower and entrust your employees with the power to engage customers and standardize the service process. You can enhance the experience, focusing your energy on designing world-class experiences now and adapt quickly to change in the future. There are some customers, though, that prefer to be solo. They're the people that go through the self-checkout line at the grocery store. They don't talk to anybody. They scan their items through the little scanner. They put their little card in the machine. They swipe it. They leave, and they don't utter a word. You know, in the social world, that's sometimes harder. So you need to be able to give access to and allow personal preferences to be realized for these types of customers. Self-service, self-help, knowledge bases. So you need the needs of your customer and empower them to take action when, how, and where they want to do it. Finally, there are those that really prefer to be social. They like talking to people. They like talking to people in your ecosystem. You can help them by making them champions. So you can offer a community-based solution and recognize those customers expect to be able to engage with peers. And, you need to be able to have the platforms and technologies available to do it. Again, that's the customer engagement continuum, and it's the way we think about things. I'm going to go through them up there for simply so you have them. As David mentioned, these slides are available for download, so I'm not going to go through this. I'd prefer to spend a few minutes through some of the Q&A that hopefully will be the outcome of the earlier part of the presentation. The Caboodle family is made up of this series of products, and information is here, and you can find it more details after the webinar. And if you have any questions, you can always contact me, and I'd be happy to talk. So now I'm going to hand it back so that in our remaining time, we can go through the Q&A.
All right. Thank you so much, Mitch. Before we begin the question and answer session, there will be a survey popping up on your screen. If you would, please take a moment to answer the question on that. That should be on your screen now. Okay, so now for our first question in our question and answer session, I'm going to direct this one to Mitch. Mitch, you say social customer service through Twitter is gaining momentum. Why is online chat not developed as fast?
I think online chat it's a person-to-person communication. So I think that in certain areas, when somebody's shopping for a purchase and they're on a website, and it is something that Caboodle offers, that what you hear is that as you're trying to make a purchase decision, going out onto Twitter, if you're on the site, is not going to help as much. So I think we're actually seeing a little bit more, but Twitter is that broad. When I have a question, I put it out, and you put it out there, or you have a complaint, or something that you get that response that happens. You're putting it out into the world. Or for those of us that want to broadcast a bad experience, they put it out to the world as well. Where chat is simply a one-to-one. So if you're really urgent, you'll just you might pick up the phone or send an email.
Okay. We talked about this next question a little bit in the presentation earlier, but perhaps we can elaborate. Paul, this one's for you. How do you sell social CRM to a CEO if metrics are getting in the way?
Well, it's not metrics that are getting in the way. It's the processes that metrics are tied to when they're inflexible that gets in the way. So that's just to clarify. Now, to answer that, again, it does go directly back to what I said. A CEO has specific self-interest that he has too, and I'll give you an example. I had a client that was an insurance company. It was a small insurance company, and it had a very specific niche kind of insurance. It literally sold insurance to churches. That's all it did. And in fact, it even had a clause where if there was a person hurt in a Pentecostal church rolling in the aisles, that they actually were covered. So it was a very highly niche focus. It was number 2 in its industry. There were about 10 or 12 different players in that industry, and they had a very, very strong agent model. Okay, independent agent model. They had no direct sales. Now, the CEO himself had come out of being an agent and became CEO of the company over years. And in his case, this is more of a, I'll call it a CRM sale than a social CRM sale, but you'll get an idea where I'm going. So what happened with the guy is he very simply said to me, look, here's the deal. I am the guy who the independent agents always looked to because I was one of them. No one else at this company was one of them in a manner that has ever been one of them. So what I need to know is not just how this helps me, how this helps the company operationally, but how is this going to help my reputation with the agents? And he was straight out on this question. How is it going to help my reputation with the agents? Well, you know what? That's a absolutely perfect and honest reflection of what, in fact, is the way you sell it. Meaning you point out the benefit to the company and you point out the benefit directly or indirectly, depending, to the individual. That's whether it's the CEO, CMO, CIO, CXO, VP of something. It doesn't matter. But you're addressing the self-interest, which means you have to spend time. You have to interview the person. You have to talk. You have to actually spend time understanding who they are, and then that you do it. But the metrics, the things they're measured on are not in the way. It's inflexible processes that metrics are associated with that get in the way.
All right, thanks for that. Another question. This one's from Mitch. Mitch, how do you create a great customer service culture from scratch?
That's I've heard that question before, and I'm trying to. I think it has to come to, maybe it's overused, but it has to be top down, which means that it has to be part of the culture and the value system of the organization that's trying to do it. I mean, it has to be that our objective and the core values of the company, so that everybody's clear on it. As I said earlier, people are, their business objectives, what's put out in front of them, they're incented based on what the company asks them to do. Or, therefore, the CEO, head of marketing, head of sales, everybody has to say that the core of what we are and what we do is to put customers first, and they have to live it and breathe it every day, which means sometimes monetary issues may get in the way of that, but you have to overcome those quickly, such as product returns. We had somebody within our company, Rachel Tate, who shared an experience she had with Amazon recently where there was an issue with something she purchased, she sent it back, and they upgraded her to the next version because it didn't have the issue, and the problem was simply solved, and she had a great experience. So to start it from scratch, it has to be a culture from the top down.
This question is sort of continues the discussion about the poll question we had earlier regarding platinum, gold versus silver customers. And I'm curious to know what the response is, because I have a feeling it might involve influencers and how you now consider influential people inside your customer base. So the question is, how companies have been segmenting customers for years via platinum, gold, silver groups. Has social changed the rules here?
Social has added rules. I mean, again, look, one thing that's really important to understand about social is really channel input and channel output that we're talking about when it comes to social here. And because it's changed, some of the cultural aspects have changed dramatically, like who can actually impact who. But there's two things here. Platinum, that customer segmentation, those are loyal customers, okay? Those are people who are buying a lot of product related to the company. They're not, and typically they haven't been rewarded on going out and advocating for the company. All right? Where the rules have the most dramatic change in the at least the approach has been that loyal used to be where companies were aimed at. Now companies are beginning to even look at advocacy as where to aim at, meaning you're not just getting rewarded for re-upping your purchases, extending the number of items you have from a company, et cetera, et cetera. But you're now being rewarded for getting others to impact your bottom line indirectly, meaning you're going out and you're advocating for the company. And to give an example of the model that is specific to that, it's a community retailing model which says that, and this is companies like Threadless and Karmaloop and others who I'm sure you've heard me talk about countless times. But the idea is very simple. Not only do you get points for buying stuff and getting your friends to buy stuff, but you get points for recruiting to the communities built around these brands, and you get points for your participation in the community, such as answering questions or uploading user-generated content. All in all, they still amount to, you get points, meaning they can become dollars or discounts or free clothes, let's say. But you're getting them for a whole other area of activity, which is indirect impact based on social. Okay, and that's a model which has been not only accepted, but is becoming increasingly implemented in even large retail chains.
Right. So one of the things I want to add, David, on that, it's not completely social, but it's a comment made by one of the folks on the webinar. I'm not going to call them out by name because that might not be fair. I'll just use a first name. Tom suggested that that people should receive the same quality level and attention to detail that your brand promises to deliver. Give them what you promise. Right? And so I think that kind of sums it up quite well, that if there's an expectation up front that different segments, different people get different promises, then that's one thing. But I think that there are the companies out there that are not focusing on the core level of quality and experience for everybody, and yet they're still segmenting and offer different experiences for people.
All right, great. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for questions today. We apologize that we were unable to answer all of the questions, and there were many. But as I stated earlier, all questions will be answered via email. I'd like to thank our speakers today, Paul Greenberg, author of the best-selling book, CRM at the Speed of Light, President, you're welcome, President of the 56 Group, and Chair of the CRM Evolution Conference, Mitch Lieberman, Vice President of Marketing at Sword Caboodle as well. If you'd like a copy of the presentation today, you can download it once the event is archived. If you'd like to review this event or send it to a colleague, please use the same URL that you used for today's event. It will be archived for 90 days. Plus, as a courtesy, you'll receive an email tomorrow with the URL to view the archive. And just for participating in today's event, you can win this Ultra Flip video camera. The winner will be announced on February 28th. Please visit destinationcrm.com to see if you're the winner. And if you stay on the console after the broadcast, you will automatically be directed to Sword Caboodle's homepage. This concludes our broadcast. Thank you for joining us.